comic books and other fun media that has to do with. I hadn't used this in forever. Boom, thank you. All right. So happy early Earth Day, and how it goes with Black Panther. So diversity, movies, and the Earth. First, Black Panther has made $1.3 billion. So that's super good. Why? Because when money talks, people listen. And Hollywood has to, at this point, put more diversity in the movies because this is what people want. And it's not even just what people want, it's how the media shapes our reality. So I'm going to talk really quick about cowboys, actually. So it's kind of a weird sidetrack, but how Hollywood has changed the idea of what a cowboy is, and nature, that relationship with nature, and how it relates to that with Black Panther. But first, props. Chadwick Boseman is a South Carolina native, so
amazing for it.
Yeah. So thank him for that. And thank you for South Carolina for bringing him into our lives. So when you look at cowboys, or you think about cowboys, you see this, rugged white man out in the fields fighting Native Americans, or cowboys and Indians. When in reality, the cowboys and Indians were the same people. When cowboys started, they were buckaroos, which they couldn't pronounce it, and they called them buckaroos. And that's where you get that word from. They were largely black, Native Mexican, and Native Americans who were out there taking care of the cattle, riding the horses, living out in the land, and Hollywood changed actually what our perception of what a cowboy is. And so this romanticized idea, when largely it was a very diverse group of people, straight, black, white, queer, women, and everything. That's who a cowboy was. And so through Hollywood, it kind of just changed what our perception of it, and media changes our reality, basically. Cowboys are white men in our head now, because that's our reality, even though that wasn't actually the case. And so having these, this largely dark-skinned black cast in this Afrofuturistic movie will help change our reality as far as what is the future for other black people. And so going into Shuri and technology in the youth, she was the head of technology. She's in the Marvel Universe, she's canonically the smartest person on Earth. And it's not even that she's smart, it's that she was actually just given the opportunity to be smart. Because, but if he had become king, he really did not want her as head of the technology in Wakanda. She, in her role with her brother, she was actually given the opportunity to do great things for Wakanda. All the technology, everything that they did as far as their advancements, she was the head of it because she was given the opportunity. And then that's had a lot to do with youth, because one of the questions was youth involvement with technology. It's not even so much as having young people be involved, it's giving them the opportunity to be involved. There has to be people who are like, I'm doing this program, do you want to be involved? And not shutting the door out for them, because she would have been shut out the door if a beautiful man had become king of Wakanda. And also youth and e-waste. So I just wanted to point out that the creative director of Black Panther, yeah. The creative director of Black Panther was a black woman, Hannah Belcher, and so was the costume designer, Ruth Carter. So they're also black people in front of the screen and behind the screen, making the movie what it was. And how the technology of Wakanda was so seamless, she did that on purpose, because you wanted to still be grounded in the real world, as well as reflect her and Ryan Coogler's, am I saying his name right? Their roots as far as traveling by train, like tech in Wakanda is so, it's just minimal. They've changed just enough to actually make themselves to live, but like the waterfall scene, that's just a straight up waterfall that they kind of close off for a minute, and they really don't disrupt nature like that. Or waterfall. Shuri's lab has an exposed exposed rock background. It's not a competition. They're not competing with technology. They're living with it, and it's their nature. So even though she has this high-tech lab, it's built into the stone walls. This is actually one of my favorite things in the movie, is the dirt road. And there's one strip of vibranium keeping that trolley up, because they could have a whole vibranium street. Well, what's the point? This works perfectly fine. It's still connected back with nature. They're not separating themselves from nature. There's no competition. It just exists. There's no fight with it. And I don't know if you can see in this picture, but a lot of the buildings actually have plants growing on the side of them. Also built through the mountain. And so that goes into elements of Afrofuturism, where I don't know, a lot of people know what the term is, but it's a speculative fiction form of fiction. A speculative form of fiction, I'm sorry. About the future of Black people and science fiction and fantasy. If you listen to Janelle Monáe, she's an Afrofuturist artist. Another band, Clipping, Afrofuturist, different artists, different authors, N.K. Jemisin, Aaliyah Butler, consider Afrofuturism because it's a future of Black people without that heaviness of oppression, but still talking about it. There's a future. I don't know how to describe it. I know when I was growing up, the big joke with the Flintstones and the Jetsons was, there's no Black people in the past and there's no Black people in the future. So like, what are you living as? Like, we're just living right now. And so Afrofuturism was, your Jetsons in the future, but with Black people. And that culture and that connection back to it without having to go, oh, we're all one race, we're the human race. No, we're Black people and we want to have our future too. And that's what Afrofuturism was. But like going into e-waste, it's kind of, I know when I got the question it was asking about e-waste, but like even if it's not just e-waste, it's other products too, just telling you to buy more because the future is bleak. You're never gonna retire, so buy more boots. Like, that's crazy. That's a bad way to like live your life. And I know it's kind of like I have a hard time with this question only because I'm 27, so I'm in this weird like limbo where I still had a VHS player and I still have one. And so like, it's still keeping hold of that old stuff, but like moving into new technology where it's like, gotta have this new phone, gotta have the new computer, gotta have this new whatever, and making more e-waste as like a young person. But like, I think with the movie, it feels so much like, less like I have to compete for new technology and actually get a better relationship with the technology I have. I can still use my old VHS player because I'm a hoarder, I'm gonna keep that forever. But I'm gonna use the technology I have for right now. I'm not gonna throw away my computer. It's a perfectly good computer. And there's that changing relationship with technology is such a big thing in that movie that I can't wait to see more of it whenever they make more movies in this genre of Black people in fiction and fantasy, because I think that's hard for some people. I mean, for a lot of Black people, living in the city is the safe spot. You leave from the country because there's the KKK, there's rednecks. You really don't have that connection back with nature. But like changing how you feel about nature, like people growing these organic gardens on top of their homes at this point. That's what Black Panther was, to me, was changing that relationship with nature as a young person. Oh no, yeah, I do. I also draw, and so I'm gonna plug my art. But that's it. And that's just some sources I have. But I hope I didn't ramble too bad.
You did good.
Fantastic. So hopefully some good food for thought from that. Hold your questions. These back on.
I am, yes. Nope, just gonna talk a little bit. So these are just some reflections on sustainability, access, and the legacy of colonialism. The film Black Panther takes its audience to Oakland, California in 1992 to reveal what I contend is the central conflict of the storyline. Access to resources, natural and political, for people of color. We are introduced to a young King T'Chaka and his brother Njobu, who is led astray from the isolationist politics of Wakanda after experiencing the plight of Black Americans while he's there in Oakland. And it's through deconstructing this initial class of the Wakandan nobility that the film offers its viewers a critique of Black transnational politics, intergenerational conflict, and the imprint colonialism has left on the African continent, albeit a fictionalized one. The film gives us an entryway in which to intellectualize, through Afrofuturism, the Africa of our wildest dreams, an African nation untouched by European interlopers intent on stripping the land of precious resources, making spectacle of sacred objects and museums, and fueling a capitalist economy through forced labor. Indeed, there's been much conversation about Wakanda as an Afrotopia. What Africa would be presently, right, if not for the insidious trade in human flesh, right? If you follow social media, then you know that there was a hashtag, right, in Wakanda, and it went on, and it talked about, you know, how Wakanda reflects what Africa could be or could have been had there not been the transatlantic slave trade, right? So while these idealized notions of Marcus Garvey's Africa for the Africans are both exciting and alluring to the dispossessed, Ryan Coogler's film, like Garvey's essay, is not devoid of the real consequences of human flaws, fears, and the instinct to survive. We understand that Wakanda, in all its glory, is a result of an extraterrestrial event in which the element vibranium falls to the earth and infects the land, the flora, and the fauna of Wakanda. It is a natural process by which the land of Wakanda is enriched and the spiritual life of its people takes on new dimensions via Bast, the divinity, in the form of a panther. We also understand that the 5 villages that consolidate to form the nation of Wakanda is keenly aware of the pillage that has taken place at the hands of the British, the French, the Portuguese, the Dutch, etc., 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 right? Not wanting to fall victim to the colonial impetus to conquer, Wakanda learns to hide in plain sight, avoiding interest in its borders and bounty from the outside world. By choosing to survive by any means necessary, however, Wakanda becomes guilty of its own type of patriot games. Under the guise of nationhood, Wakanda seizes control over a resource that rightly belongs to the earth and not just the inner sanctum of its borders. In choosing to restrict who can have access to and knowledge of vibranium, the Wakanda elite operate more like their colonial adversaries than perhaps they care to admit. The idea that one group can retain the rights to any natural resource moves against traditional African beliefs in which life, land, and spirit are intricately connected and respected. We would do well to think critically about the implications this has on our topic today, considering how race enters the discourse around Earth Day, access, and sustainable practices of consuming nature. Wakanda, in all of its wonders, is not above critique. We see this conflict between rights to the land and resources come to a head in the scene in which Njobu and T'Chaka engage in ideological battle. Njobu chooses to sell vibranium on the black market in what I believe is a misguided effort to try to balance the playing field for his diasporan kinfolk. T'Chaka wants to persecute him for treason and for placing the national security of Wakanda at risk. Which brother's mission is more noble? Njobu wants to use vibranium to empower communities of color against racial and social indignities. T'Chaka seeks to protect the resources from being exploited. The real history of exploitation is quite visible in the West. For centuries, gold has been mined from Ghana, diamonds from the Democratic Republic of Congo, mahogany and ebony timber from Liberia, and as of late, the southern white rhino has been poached to near extinction, right? That was a story that came out just a couple weeks ago. In this context, it seems reasonable for Wakanda to hold its secrets tight and doggedly protect its borders. But the storyline does not make the resolution that simple. One might even argue that with all of its technological advances, Wakanda is exclusively guilty of exploiting vibranium for its own purposes. T'Chaka's political convictions lead to the violent death of his brother at his own hands. Does his actions and motives align him more with the colonizer his daughter Shuri calls out later in the film? This is a question we must contend with as the film turns toward the historically tumultuous relationship between continental Africans and black folks of the diaspora. For Eric Killmonger, his positionality determines how he interprets the politics of Wakanda. He represents, for me at least, the disenfranchised, underserved, stereotypically violent, fatherless black child living in poverty that American racial disparities has created. Only his fatherlessness is a result of T'Chaka's myopic view about how to allocate vibranium and not the American brand of racialized terror and violence. While Wakanda, as far as we know, is not implicit in the trading of human resources for guns, ROMs, and mirrors, Killmonger's character symbolizes the half-caste or slave baby, to use a colloquial phrase from Ghana. He is of Wakanda by DNA, but his experience of displacement and abandonment by his Wakandan relatives mimics the experience for descendants of enslaved folks, particularly in America, who have socially and legally been denied access to all the amenities of citizenship. Safe housing, equal protection under the law, healthy food, quality education, the list goes on and on. Killmonger technically serves as the villain of the film, but one of the most valuable aspects of the film that I see is that it articulates how a person like Killmonger evolves into such a pathology wherein the oppressed becomes the oppressor. Stigmatized by his black maleness in Oakland and rejected for no apparent reason by Wakanda, Killmonger has been choked off from two sites of home. Home being a place one usually considers safe, nurturing, and communal. He suffers from racism and poverty in Oakland while being fully aware of the Wakanda's ability to save him and offer him a better, more sustainable existence as a person of color. His resentment at being denied access to his father, to a better quality of life, is shaped by Western ideologies that rely on violence to beget submission. It is not by chance that Wakanda, always seeking to protect and sustain itself outside of the realm of colonialism, is usurped by a figure who embodies the worst characteristics of imperialism. Once assuming power, Killmonger lays waste to what in Wakanda is probably its most precious resource, right? The heart-shaped plant, right? That gives the Black Panther its power, helps to heal. Once assuming power, Killmonger lays waste. I read that part. Sorry. I recall the audience, as I was sitting in the theater, I recall the audience's distressed reaction to the sacred space where the heart-shaped plant was cultivated being set aflame, right? Everyone was like, oh, like you know, it's blasphemous, right? To burn that sacred space, right? And to destroy, right, all of the heart-shaped plants, right? Because then, you know, the problem becomes how do we get that back? Once we destroy it, it's gone, right? So even the audience had a visceral response to that. It is likely one of Killmonger's most selfish acts. But is it any more selfish than Wakanda keeping the plant, another natural resource, from the universe to itself, natural resource from the universe to itself, rather than using it to heal and advance medicine across borders, right? Something for us to think about. It begs the question of whether Killmonger is indeed a villain or simply a monster created by Wakanda's own design. There's a lesson to be learned here, and our hero, T'Challa, appears to be a quick study. Killmonger's angst and violence are a direct result of his experience and his oppression. He takes out his frustration and hate at being ill-treated by both Africa and America on whoever crosses his path. He is the proverbial crab in the barrel, sabotaging everything and anything that may surpass his own hard-knock life. T'Challa understands, better than his father, that the isolationist policies of Wakanda, the turning a blind eye to the problems of the diasporic world when they have an abundance of resources to make a difference, is as problematic, if not more, than the destruction and chaos that Killmonger brings to Wakanda. T'Challa understands the error his father made by leaving Killmonger behind as a child, He understands that that's the reason for this intergenerational gap in wealth and resources between two cousins, right? So remember, they are actually cousins. They come from the same family, right? But their experiences are extremely different. One of the most stunning moments for me in the film is when T'Challa confronts his father in the ancestral realm and proclaims to all the ancestors that he was wrong and that he assumes, right, that he can't go with his father. He cannot ascend to the realm of the ancestors because he still has work to do in Wakanda, right? And he assumes the responsibility for making this intergenerational gap between him and his cousin, making this right. And I think that was, for me, one of the most powerful scenes, right? We see the seeming resolution of this intergenerational border conflict in the final scene where T'Challa takes Killmonger to see the Wakanda sunset before taking his last breath. And while this may heal the broken pieces of Killmonger's longing to belong and be granted access, it still does not tie up the very loose ends with which Wakanda will have to negotiate as its king decides to change the politics of isolation and reveal to the world what Wakanda truly has to offer. The film leaves us with much to consider. How much burden does Wakanda have to bear, fictionally or otherwise, for the transnational Black community's racial disparities? What will be the result of announcing to the world that vibranium exists? How will such an opening of borders and resources affect Wakanda's ability to employ sustainable practices and not deplete the limited deposits of vibranium it has? And certainly, what are some of the other real-world implications about nationhood, resources allocation, and simple human rights and access to wealth, access to natural resources across the globe, right? So these are some of the questions that I'm kind of left with, right? Okay, you're going to announce to the world, to the UN, right at the end of the film, that vibranium exists, but then what happens, right? And just to kind of connect this to kind of this neo-colonial movement that's happening, right? We know, or you may be aware, that China has its hands all over Africa, right? They're investing and they're creating infrastructure and they're creating these economic ties to Africa in the same way that, you know, in previous generations Europeans did. So how does that bode well, or perhaps maybe it doesn't bode so well for Wakanda, right? So I'll leave it at that and look forward to the conversation we'll have. Thank you.
Prepared to leave it at that myself.
Now you got to tell us about the ancestors and the earth.
Well, I didn't prepare slides and certainly didn't prepare a presentation like Camilla. I deal with the ancestors often, and I deal with the earth often because those that I know are our ancestors are in the earth. At least their remains are in the earth. And but I also deal with the ancestors knowing that though their remains are in the earth, they're present and available to us here. And so oftentimes I'm called to pour libations to the ancestors. I'm called to let me back up a little bit. I'm a Yoruba priest, a Babalao, and in that role, I'm called to serve the community, and oftentimes the oracle that the community comes to me to help them to have access to takes us to the ancestors and things that oftentimes need to be performed in behalf of the ancestors. And so in Wakanda, we saw the ancestors present in different ways. One was when he had to return to the ancestors for wisdom. Okay? And the wisdom that he returned to the ancestors to receive had to be oracular through oracles. Okay, and so for young people to begin to see in the movie Wakanda, the ancestors, as they were situated in that movie, their role, their power, their needing to be consulted for the leaders to advance. While that was fictional, it's real in an African context. In the world of traditionalists, which I am, we still seek access to the ancestors. We still go to the oracles to consult. Okay, so it was, I think you referenced Shuri's position as she was given the opportunity to have that position. While that may be what's apparent, that I think that what we don't see is before she was given that opportunity, the ancestors had to be consulted to see if she was the person that could in fact contain the power that she has. Okay, because in traditional Yoruba practices, okay, the herbs from the earth, sometimes earth, are all created into this composite that we call ashe. And when the ashe is applied to your head, which is where it goes, your ori, we call ori, it gives you power to perform certain tasks. Okay, so that the ashe is the particular kind of ashe that would go in your head, because there are different people with different heads who require different powers to fulfill their roles. Okay, so depending on what Orisha, we call them, will guide your life, that's the composite of the herbs, the earth, and things that will be created into this formula that we call ashe, that will be placed in your head to give you the power to do what it is that you are purposed to do. So Shuri, in my imagination, was not only given opportunity, she was given ashe to be able to access the kind of knowledge that she needed to have. Because when we get ashe placed in our head, with that comes the knowledge that with ashe you can do anything. All things are accomplishable, but not without constant access and relationship with your ancestors. So the oracle that we most rely on is called Ifa. And when we look at Africa and when we look at African traditions, what we fail to see and understand that these traditions have been and are today considered African science. African science. And what we saw evident in much of Wakanda was science, but not African science as we know it. We know that science existed in what we call ancient Africa. We like to bring that forward. The science that existed in Egypt, and other ancient places in Africa, but not talk about how that science exists today. Ifa is a science. It's a technology that informs us. And we like to say that Ifa knows yesterday, Ifa knows today, Ifa knows tomorrow. So our connection to the past and the present is should I say, granted to us, to our access to Ifa. And when I was, there are several different societies in Yoruba communities. And one of them is the Ogboni Society. The Ogboni Society is the society that takes care of the earth and understand that the ancestors live in the earth. And then it's a secret society. And one of the things that you have to do to be initiated into this society is you have to eat the earth. You have to digest the earth. So if you're eating and ingesting this earth that will imbue you with access to the ancestors, it would make sense that you appreciate the value of that earth that you're going to ingest to have access to these ancestors. So, what's one other? And those of us who grow up in the USA, many are taught from a very early age to detach themselves from the ancestors. The ancestors are created as spooky. They're created as ghosts. They're created as this thing that you never want to see. Young people don't go to cemeteries for the same reason, because they're haunted by the notion that that's a place that you fear. So when you create that kind of fear, that barrier between people and their ancestors, you create a vacuum. So I think that Wakanda, with the things that Camilla pointed out, it has shortcomings and certainly needs to be critiqued. But it provides, for the first time that I've seen, a notion of our potential relationship to ancestors. So I'll stop with that.